Okay. All right. Okay. We're running a little bit late, and John Lee is here. Yay! Okay, perfect timing, perfect timing. And so, John, I'm so glad you're here because I was just teeing up this really fun, amazing journey that we've been on with many of the people in this room. And some of the group is the Thunderbird Foreign Policy Initiative students that, you guys have just been such a gift to do this work with you over the last 8 months. I was just saying, John, before you came in, that the very first event we did was the Global Ties Arizona event. And I don't know if you remember, but Tarun, who's one of the founding student members of the Thunderbird Foreign Policy Initiative, was on that panel with Craig Calhoun and my old friend Diane Long, who tragically passed away not too long ago. But, it's just been such an amazing journey. One of the things I always like to remind people of is that the Foreign Policy Initiative isn't just the Doug Guthrie China Club. It is, China just happens to be my area of passion and knowledge and research, but the Foreign Policy Initiative is staged to do a lot more, right? And so we're just beginning this journey. But we started this journey together in April and the Global Ties event was April 30th, 2024. And since then, John, Lisa, remind me, I think we've done 6, have we done 5? So this is our 5th event with you guys. And it's been amazing, guys. It's been such an important thing. And we have people like Aaron Eagles that's here, and you've been such a stalwart member of these events too. And really, again, this is about an initiative that is about the Foreign Policy Initiative. And so one of the key things that we think about at Thunderbird, and it's one of my hobby horses, and I think the students share this with me, but it's also something that I share with Dominic Tora, who was one of the people who's the alum who started this with me, is, first of all, I think institutions that teach about cross-cultural management and global mindset are really important in the world today, right? And that's Thunderbird, right? And that's Arizona State University. But I also have the view that we need to also teach sort of hard edge policy analysis, right? And so you have a lot of business schools that when they do the hard edge stuff they'll do a lot of economics, right? And have a lot of econometricians, do a lot of finance. And then you got the sort of, well, we do teach management, leadership, cross-cultural mindset. But I also am a believer that we have to train our business leaders to think really, really deeply about what's going on in the geopolitical system, right? And many of you have heard me tell this story so many times, so forgive me for repeating it. But, my favorite example of this is, when I went to work for Tim Cook in 2014, right after Xi Jinping was elected, about a year after he was elected, but, Apple started getting called out the day after Xi Jinping was inaugurated. And I was amazed by this phenomenon. Here is probably the smartest business person I've ever met in my life, Tim Cook. He's the reason Apple is the second most profitable company in the world, right? He knows so little about the economic geopolitical situation that was meant to come with the rise of Xi Jinping. I was stunned, not to speak ill of him, but I was like, how could you not understand what's happening right now, right? Your exposure in China is tremendous. And so, just coming back to this, we believe at Thunderbird and the little group of students that I work with on this, and so Paul Ear and a couple of other people, we just believe we've got to go hard at this stuff. We have to train the world how to have thought leadership that's about geopolitical systems and what's happening on the geopolitical landscape. And of course, China being my area of work, this is where my focus is. But right after that Global Ties event, John, I can't remember if you approached me that day at that event that night, or it was very shortly thereafter, but you said, we got to do something. And it's been just a gift. It's been such a gift. And I hope, I'm planning, John, Lisa, everybody, on us continuing to do this together, right? Sure. But this was our first agreement, was to let's go through the end of the year and just do this as much as we can. And so we've been having conversations about a bunch of different things, right? We've been talking about the rise of China. We've been talking about cross-cultural management and the flow of culture between different areas of work. And we decided today we want to come back to a theme. And I think maybe, John, maybe one of the reasons you approached me initially is we were talking about this moment, and as I was thinking about that Global Ties event, it was so exciting to me because here as a China scholar, I believe we are at the lowest point in US-China relations in 30 years, right? And the reason I always say 30 years is because 1994 was the year that Bill Clinton did the China engagement agreement. And it felt to me in 94 that things were going to get better, and that got us onto a path to 7 years later get China into the World Trade Organization, and just our economies became more and more intertwined. However, the last 8 years have been a dark time, right? And that tension started with the election of President Trump in 2016, tariffs, et cetera. And many of you have heard me say this, but I'll say it again just because it's my hobby horse. But anybody, even if they're President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, who tells you that tariffs are not a tax on U.S. consumers, is either stupid or they're lying, right? It is, China doesn't get taxed. U.S. consumers do. And so there's 300 billion in tariffs sitting there. And we can talk more about tariffs at some point, but it's one of my hobby horses. But I continue to think that these are difficult. Honey, your hair, awesome. And so we have to continue to have dialogue, and we have to continue to teach each other. And so when we started doing that event in November, April 30th, 2024, and I started thinking about this, I was still pretty new to Phoenix. Many of you know that I grew up coming here because my grandfather was a professor at Arizona State University, so I've sort of come home. But back then, Phoenix wasn't the 5th largest economy in America. It wasn't the fastest growing economy in America. It was just a place that was a weird town in the desert, right? Today, it is one of the most powerful economies in America, and it is ground zero for US-China relations. Why? Not only because it's a fast-growing city, but also because TSMC is here. 3 fab plants, $65 billion in investment in Phoenix is set for those 3 plants. But that's not the only one, right? JA Solar is coming, right? And who were we on the phone with this past week? That airline company. And so it's just, there's a lot. This is a really, really interesting and exciting time to be having this conversation. So we thought we would end the year in this discussion by talking about globalizing Arizona, foreign investment and overseas trade in this surging economy. Now, as one of our experts we have on the line, I'm just going to be somebody who lectures at you a little bit and says some of what I know, but I also have my good friend, John McKiel. And John, I want you to introduce yourself, and then if Tony is here, he can introduce himself. And we only have Tony for a short amount of time, but John, why don't you jump in?
Hi, Doug, and hi, everybody. It's great to be back. Thanks for having me. My name is John McKiel, and I had the privilege of working with Doug, more than 10 years ago now, when we were both in DC. And Doug and I overlapped quite a bit on not only China work, but foreign direct investment. I spent a significant portion of my career living and working either in or with China and fostering foreign direct investment into the United States. Excited to be back to chat some more about investment trends and best practices.
Great. And Tony, you're there?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I'm having a little trouble with this down, but so just speak up and speak well. And
okay.
And we just have Tony for a short amount of time, but Tony is another superstar in this field. So Tony, introduce yourself.
I'm not a superstar. I'm just an old guy. Thanks for that. Hi, my name is Antonio Yung. Most of the time, people call me Tony. I was in the private sector for 40 years, and when I retired about 10 years ago, I was recruited by the City of Sacramento mayor and then Governor Brown to help Sacramento region to be more international, in particular to engage with China, because at that time, there's a lot of activities going back and forth. So I brought my private sector's experience, also my connections, and the way I approach economic development is slightly different than most other folks that traditional is on the government sector or the academic side of them. I mainly look at it from the business side of them. What is the win-win situation, and how do you make all the stakeholders a winner in order to attract foreign direct investment? Sacramento is not the size of Phoenix, even though we're the capital city of California, but traditionally we're a government town. We're not San Francisco, we're not Los Angeles, so we kind of have to use a little different tactic than most other FDI organizations. Today, I was honored to be invited to share some of my experience. Just let me know what you need to know, and I'll try to share.
One quick thing just for anybody, is there any basketball fans in the room? Okay, John, so you guys may recognize this, but the mayor that Tony is talking about having worked with was Kevin Johnson of the Phoenix Suns, and he became mayor of Sacramento. And anyway, I just thought that was a fun fact.
Absolutely.
So, hey, you guys, Tony and John, I'm going to flip things around a little bit because I have some presentation and some stage setting to do. But since Tony, you guys is so nice because he's sitting in an airport and he's going to have to get on a plane pretty soon. And so I want to just make sure we economize his time. And so, Tony and John, is it okay with you if we jump in and start with the interview with you guys, and then whatever, Tony, you just tell us when you have to take off, and then we'll jump back in with other broader discussions. Barry, so good to see you, my friend. Thank you for being here. And Barry, just so you know, we got on the line, we have two experts. One you've met before, John McKiel, who worked for the Department of Commerce and has thought a lot about investment. And then we have Tony Yung, who was sort of led the field of developing Chinese investment in Sacramento for many years. And so they're going to share their insights with us. And then when Tony has to go, and again, he's being so generous with his time because he's sitting in an airport lounge, but thank you, Tony. So guys, if I could and I don't want this just to be my show, I would love for us to have an interactive dialogue, but what I want to do is sort of interview our experts first and get their ideas, but I want to hear questions from you guys too, right? This is what we try to do in these events, and I try to do it in my classrooms, is we try to create interactive dialogue. So this isn't just, Doug and a couple of people talking at you. This is us really being engaged with, again, an issue that I've always been passionate about, the solidifying or making U.S.-China relations through economic engagement. This is what I think has built this relationship since Deng Xiaoping came and signed the papers with Jimmy Carter in 1979, right? And we've seen China grow, and we've seen tremendous economic engagement that has really built a very, very close relationship with our nations. And many of you have heard me say this, and I'll just say it again, even though U.S.-China relations are at, I think, a low point of the last 30 years, we're married. We cannot break up. We cannot have an economic Cold War. We cannot have a Cold War in general. I mean, companies like Apple, and again, that's the case I know better than any other, but Apple is married to China. The idea that Foxconn has a plant in Chennai doesn't mean anything. The fact that Apple is so deeply tied to China is the reason Apple's the most profitable company in the world, second most profitable company in the world. And same with Tesla, right? And so who's Donald Trump's main advisor right now? Elon Musk. There's no way that we are walking away from, now Tesla's in a little bit of a safer place than Apple is because it actually has manufacturing facilities in the United States and other places. Apple doesn't, right? And so anyway, that's just all to say I'm nervous, but I think it's an awesome time, right? And it's an awesome time to be talking about this. And it's a really exciting time to be talking about it with respect to Phoenix, right? And so that's the real issues. And John again did a lot with foreign investment through the Department of Commerce in the United States, and Tony through the City of Sacramento. And so what I want to do is I want to sort of get your views, John and Tony, about how do we move forward on continuing to build this momentum, right? And so what I want to I'm going to ask you guys some specific questions, but if we could start first with you, Tony, and then over to you, John, about the issues that you see are critical for local political economy, right? And here again, this is a little bit of a hobby horse of mine, but I want to break the Washington-Beijing consensus. Like, this isn't just about Janet Yellen going over to Beijing and waving her fingers at a talk in Guangzhou and talking about trade. This is about sister cities, right? Right, Aaron? Like this is about Phoenix and Chengdu. This is about Tempe and Zhenjiang, right? And so there's a process here. But Tony, if you could just take us through sort of how you developed what you were doing for the city of Sacramento, and so that we might learn as the city of Phoenix from your experiences.
Okay. So when I first was asked to take on the job and I studied the landscape of Sacramento, I mean, by 2025, I will be in Sacramento 50 years, even though most of my working experience is overseas and international. Understanding, what we have as an asset. And then I start looking at how other cities or state or countries doing economic development. What I found is most of them were talking about, we have universities, I'm the transportation hub, the usual pitch. But I don't think people understand that most of the city to the Chinese or even to the rest of the world is just a dot on the map. They have no affiliation to it. And when everybody's saying the same thing, it doesn't touch them. And so I went the other route, and because of who we are in Sacramento, to say, we're going to be project focused. What I mean is I don't pitch location. I pitch that these are the things that I'm looking for partners, looking for investments, and these are the advantages. These are the risk. These are the ROI, and basically just talk projects. And that has been proven to be really successful. And of course, relationship is another thing. Since day one, I convinced Mayor Johnson to say, we have to have foot on the ground. Flying in, getting out is really not it's not enough because everybody flying in and getting out. Because it's pretty superficial, it's hard to build relationship. You can have a lot of dinners, a lot of drinking, but unfortunately, you cannot get deep into the local geopolitics. I mean, even China, they're so centralized from power, but every city, every provinces, every municipality have competitions. A lot of times, I use that as a leverage. Also, one thing that I think why people understand it, they really don't know how to attack it, which is the number one entity you need to deal with is government. You have no choice but to deal with the government. So you have to have an open mind and understand their systems. Also, you need to see how you can minimize the layer of government that you have to deal with, because there's way too many layers, way too many people. You do not have enough. You don't have enough resources to deal with it, either time, money, or traveling, or whatever it is. So you really need to figure out how to minimize that. And the way I figure it out is I went with the highest level first. But because I am a city, so I actually leverage the governor's office, and I link up with the governor's office and got our office as part of the partnership with GoBiz, which is the economic development arm for the governors. That was started by Governor Brown, and that will elevate, the city's statue, so to speak, because they also always wanted to be equal. If you're a city and then you deal with the city. The same thing with, and the other thing is I did not go the sister city route, because China is a very much of a zero and sum game. If you go in as a sister city, the sister city you are with, of course, we very welcome you, but you kind of limited your development geographic area. So I went in with an office, a trade and investment office status instead of using the sister city. I still leverage them, don't get me wrong. But that way allow me to go to different level, allow me to go to different geographic area. So, and when we find the proper investors or potential partners, and I am not being geographically limited.
Interesting. Okay, so that's actually, I'm curious what you especially, Aaron, you've thought a lot about sister cities, and you and I have talked a lot about the development of that kind of relationship. It sounds like, Tony, you're saying that it's a little bit double-edged sword or a little bit dangerous because it can sort of really tie you into a focus on, say, Phoenix and Chengdu, rather than sort of.
Yeah, I do leverage it. I mean, I definitely leveraged it. Don't get me wrong. But however, if you only focus on one, because every city has a sister city, right? If you go in like that and you just kind of, they're on China's side of them, they will think about, well, I need to turn in my homework. I need to get to my sister city and get him something equal. And sometimes, like you say, it's a double-edged sword. So like I say, why I leveraged it, I do trying to not using, I use a sister city, but that's not my status of going in. My status is a trade and investment office. And also I try to limit, so there are 4 municipalities in China: Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, and Chongqing. Most of the economic development agencies are all in Shanghai. Beijing is a little bit too political, but that's the second place. Tianjin, probably nobody's there. The military status elevate them to be municipality, to be directly under the government. Chongqing is the newest one, it's from 1997. And they also, in some sense, if you understand the geopolitical consent, is the newest one, they're also the lowest one among them. But if I deal with a municipality instead of a city, I do not have to deal with the city government and then the provincial government. I'm dealing one government. And then because in some sense, there are only 4 of them, so their mayor is actually half a rank higher than most of the province head. So with that, I can also leverage Central, because Central want these newer area to be successful. So understanding that part of them is really important. And Doug, I heard you say something that's really important, which is training the US, business leaders. And I think the Chinese business leader also need to be trained in order to get everybody on the same page. And that is not an easy task. Many people will just say, well, there's a cultural barrier. Or if there's a barrier, and then you need to break it, because that's going to affect how successful that project's going to be.
Well, Aaron, did you want to jump in here?
You talk about Tianjin? You said Tianjin.
Yeah. Yeah. So just so for all the China people in the room know, but I'll just say this for everybody else. So one of the things that Tony just said, Beijing has, or China has 31 provincial level units, but 4 of them are provincial level municipalities, right? Shanghai, Beijing, Tianjin, and Chongqing. And so they're just different status. Right. And so it's an interesting way to sort of think about this. And in my opinion, I might disagree with Tony a tiny bit, in that it is true. And, for a long time, Shanghai was the place. Right. And so when Tesla went to, well, first when GM went to Shanghai, it was the first time that a US automaker, well, first time that any world automaker got into China, not reporting up to the Ministry of Commerce, but to the Bureau of Commerce in Shanghai, right? And so that was a really important move, because it made Shanghai's status and GM status very interesting in that space. When Tesla entered China as a foreign company in the automobile sector, it's the first time that any automobile maker was ever allowed into China without a joint venture, right? And so the Shanghai government has been, the place where a lot of these negotiations have happened. My personal view, Tony, is that Beijing has, or China has. But my personal view is that we're sort of run out of like the major places. I think the more interesting places in China are the second tier cities, where all of the innovation is happening in industrial clusters. And so, and I learned that some from Apple, because we've got focused not on Shanghai, but on Zhengzhou and other places. And so I just think that there's a lot to do in China that's not with the big places. But I make the point that we shouldn't be focusing on just one sister city.
Yeah, but Doug, I think from the governmental structure standpoint, right? How they define municipality and how they define first-tier city is different in China. Chongqing is not a first-tier city in the definition, even though they're a municipality from political standpoint. So sometimes, just be careful to look at that, how politically they structure them versus how economically they structure them. And also, I agree with you. Shanghai will be. I agree with you. Shanghai is Shanghai is hard to deal with for any newcomers, because they got so much attention, right? As you know, smaller. Everybody that needs to be there is already there. Everybody needs to go out is already out. So I think your second tier city thought is very, very important, because they do, from an economic standpoint, they a lot of them have enough. Chengdu definitely have enough. Chongqing have enough. Even Hangzhou is first tier this year. So, but some of them, Jiangzhou because of the manufacturer, and then because the government focus on it also has it. I think you have a very good point on focusing on the second tier cities.
Thank you for that. And I know we're going to lose you soon, Tony, but I want to jump over to John for a second. And one of the things, and I want to lay this out, an agenda for this room, right? We're a team of people who have been educating ourselves and educating each other and educating anybody who listens to and wants to watch our thing. But, and hearing what you did for Sacramento, Tony, I think is really, really interesting. But I want to mention that one of the things that John and I, the first project that John and I ever did together was we wrote a massive economic development plan that had as a core part of it Chinese investment in the city of Washington, D.C. And I would love for folks in this room, anybody who's interested in that, to figure that out for Phoenix, because, and maybe John and I haven't been looking in the right places, but when we've kind of clicked around and tried to find where the strategic plan for economic development is, it's a little bit lame. We haven't found and maybe we're just not finding it in the right places. Maybe there is a really great strategic economic development plan that's hidden, but if there's not, I would love to be working with people in this room and working with Neil Giuliano and the Greater Phoenix leadership. And I know Neil has this as a plan, it's part of what he's trying to do to develop, not just Greater Phoenix leadership, but also state of Arizona economic development. But John, could you talk a little bit about how the work you and I did for the District of Columbia sort of helped your career, or helped lead you into the Department of Commerce and build what you developed as a career in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So Doug and I, again, quite a few years ago, back when I had hair. No, I was just kidding.
12 years ago.
We were worked together. We worked together at George Washington and overlapped with the DC government's office. And DMPED is what it's called, Deputy Mayor of Planning and Economic Development. And we worked closely with them to develop the strategic plan for DC. One of those items was opening a representative office in Shanghai. And so we went on the inaugural trip, taking the mayor to Shanghai. That eventually expanded into a second office in Beijing for DC. Note there were really big political reasons also for DC to have an office in Beijing. And so they leveraged some of those political regions. But one of the things I wanted to touch on, going back to what Doug and Tony were saying, and things that I think from an economic development standpoint, oftentimes what we miss sometimes when we're looking at relationships between China and the United States is we think China and US, we think national, we think, Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. But what we often miss is the relationships that are happening underneath that, tracking trade flows, looking at imports and where things are coming from China, and tracking exports and where they're going to. And the reason I point that direction is because when you track those numbers and you look at those, there's a database called FDI Markets that you can use in economic development that tracks flows back and forth from everywhere in the United States, tracks the foreign direct investment flows. And there are easy ways to start pinpointing where to start targeting. And so leveraging those existing business relationships is really important for economic developers who are trying to figure out, okay, which city do I launch into? Where should I target? Where should I do my lead generation? There are also other really great options for folks that don't have state offices overseas with the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service. They can do targeted meetings, setting up meetings with folks in foreign countries. Help and think oftentimes these are focused on trade, but can be leveraged for investment attraction as well. And so those kinds of data sources, but really, I mean, data is important here, right? I mean, you don't want to go in the middle of Xinjiang if you're not looking, if there are absolute no, Tony laughs because he and I actually overlapped in Xinjiang, but you don't want to go to the middle of Xinjiang if there's no investment there for you, right? And so really trying to think through the data and understand where you're targeting, where's the automotive hub? And Doug and I have talked extensively about this as well. Similar to how, when you think automotive in the United States, you think the Midwest, you think Michigan, and you think now expansion into North Carolina and these hubs that have established for automotive. Well, China has similar clusterings, right? And so those clusterings are local, they're not national. And really thinking through those kinds of alignments and those kinds of synergies is really important when developing a strategy for attracting foreign direct investment.
Love that, John. Thank you for that. And again, I have a pitch to this room that it is a part of what I think we can think about strategically, and I want to start that conversation. But I just want to make sure that we're getting your guys' time. Any comments or questions or thoughts, responses to the things that John and Tony are raising? Yeah, please, Lisa.
So Tony, so you mentioned when you pick the relationship with China, typically you focus on projects. Can you give a quick example? Because when you have the project, right, typically you go directly to the 4 cities you mentioned. And I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of challenges, right? If you can give us a project, what challenges?
Sure.
How did you connect successfully?
Sure. Okay, so the time that when I started the office, everything is timing, right? So at the time, HP had 40 people in Chongqing. So I find out that Chongqing government, because they're one of the municipality, they really wanted HP to establish, in Chongqing because they have land and everything else. So these days, well, last I checked, HP has 7,000 people in Chongqing. So our office try to. I'm sorry.
7,000.
7,000 in Chongqing, yeah, and they also, I mean, to show you how smart the Chinese are, they understand what the HP is the printer division that they wanted it. So that was one of the projects, and on the China side of them, we link them up. We do advising, even though it's not in Sacramento because California is part of my responsibility with GoBiz. With that, and then we also find a local company that does logistics called Prime Industry. They becomes the worldwide part distribution for all printed parts for HP, also in the with the Chongqing facilities. So I was able to do that, and then also attracting additional business into Sacramento. And on this side of them, at the time, when Doug mentioned our mayor biggest accomplishment during his tenure was to save the Sacramento Kings to be in Sacramento. At the time, the NBA say they will stay if Sacramento can give them a new stadiums. we were about 148 million short, even after the city invested 220 million. So we redesigned the investments portfolio and make it EB5, which is investment immigration. And then we were able to raise 150 million for Sacramento from Chinese investor within 6 months. So those are the projects that we go in and say, these are the thing that we want to do and who's interested. I don't necessarily just go into Chongqing. We have an office there on the ground because they wanted us. We were one of the few foreign offices there. But we make it very clear that because we are a trade investment office, our location can be in Chongqing, but we do cover the rest of China. So we went in and they understand that it's not just for Chongqing, but they give us a lot of support and a lot of direct access to not only to their government, but also to central. So those are the two projects. Currently, we're working on because since this year, July 1st, all charging stations have to be 55% made in the USA. So, and 90% of these charging stations, or 80-something% charging stations are made in China. So if they want this market, they're going to come in. And since California have close to half the EV being sold in one state, and we lack that infrastructure. So right now, one of the projects we're pitching is actually we need an investor in partnership to build at least 55% of charging stations in the US. And we will give them, certain amount of incentives. And more importantly, we'll give them businesses and then allow them to, continue to market, way beyond Sacramento, California, into the rest of the United States.
So one quick question, just for, I don't know that everybody in the room knows. So thank you for that question, Lisa. But are EB5 visas still in play? Yeah.
It is. Actually, there's new rules. 800,000 is the minimum. And then there is a new rule that at least currently in place, if it's in a rural area, that is defined. People who are on the ground in the US, for example, students, can get a working permit within 6 months. So the project, the EB5 is there. For a while, it becomes not attractive because of most of these projects are not good. And the other reason is because there's not enough quota, and people are waiting for 10 years or so it's become non-attractive. But with the new rural parameters, it becomes very attractive for the students that are already studying in the US because they'll be able to change their status and get different things. But the most important for EB5, right, actually, is going to be the project and who's managing the project. I think that will make a huge difference of how safe the investment is and how likely the whole process will go through.
Right. Just for those in the room who don't know, like the EB5 visa program is that if a certain amount of investment comes, and I don't know what the numbers are, but it sounds like Tony and John know. But you can get a visa expedited very quickly, and so like it's a good model for building its kind of relations. Any other comments, questions? Thank you, Lisa, for your question. That was amazing. Yeah, Tate.
Tony, John, it's great to be with you all. Tate Mulligan with Thunderbird Foreign Policy Initiative. There's been an increase in trade between China and Mexico, and us being a border state, I'm curious how our relationship with Mexico will be impacted by this increase, and what should we do? What do you all think?
John, Tony.
I think before, from the Chinese side of them, it's being looked at. This is not before, like solar energies and stuff like that. It's about not making in China because it's about dumping, about whatever it is. Going forward, it's about making in America. Sooner or later, these other areas going to be closed down. Same thing with the Vietnam, Cambodia. I mean, I think it's very clear, no matter who the president is, going forward, it's going to be about making America. So things that I think once the US are confident, they can, we can do our own supply chain and so on and so forth. They'll close that down completely. That's my opinion.
So John, I want to hear from you, but like, let me just disagree with Tony for a minute. You and those of you who have had me in class, you know what my thoughts on this are. And like, I've been a business school professor for 30 years and like I've worked for Tim Cook. Tim Cook's a nice guy. He's a brilliant businessman. He's about shareholder value. Like there is no way that we can build those manufacturing supply, and it's just too expensive, right? With labor contracts.
Yes.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why Arizona is such an interesting state, is because Arizona is a right to work state, right? And so right to work states are tougher for unions. Now we're seeing some really interesting things happen with TSMC and the way they're treating employees. And we've seen Arizona TSMC employees sue TSMC, right? So this is getting really interesting. And it's one of the reasons Arizona is such a state for this. But just to counter a little bit, in my view, to counter a little bit what Tony's saying, we ain't building manufacturing supply chain. It's not going to happen, right? It's just like, we just don't have the, and Anima, I see you nodding over here, but just to be clear, one of the reasons that China and India have such an advantage over America is not just because of unions, and we have non-right to work states and right to work states, and Arizona's a right to work state, and so it undercuts the power of union. But India doesn't, as far as I know, Anima, they don't have this as well developed as China does, but China has what they call a migrant labor force of 360 million people who the government moves around the country. And these are poor people who are moved into seasonal labor production at multiple factories around the country. In the US, there's just there's nothing like that in the United States. And so like the idea that, Tony, like that, I think that's the goal. That's the goal of tariffs, is to rebuild manufacturing supply chains in America. It ain't gonna happen. Like it's too expensive here. And so that's why I fundamentally believe we have to think about like, this is an opportunity for all of us who care about US-China relations to say like, guys, we're married. Like we have to do this, like, let's do it. And let's get, so the one thing that is interesting about what Tony's saying, my fantasy, Lisa, you're laughing because you heard me talk about my fantasies too much. My fantasy is, okay, so Foxconn just built a plant in Chennai, great. Let's go talk to the leaders of Foxconn and get them to build a plant in Phoenix. And let's go talk to Jo Shun-Fei of Lens and get her to build a plant in Phoenix. And let's go talk to Grace Wong, Luxshare ICT, and get her to build a plant. Like, if we were really going to do what Tony said, it's like rebuilding manufacturing supply chains here, we need Chinese manufacturers to go global and invest in Arizona. And so anyway, I'm a little more skeptical. I guess I was thinking I was skeptical, but maybe I'm with you, Tony, but I just think we got to be really strategic about it.
But I think you and I are actually on the same page. In order for us to have those manufactured, we're going to need Chinese investments into it. From battery to charging stations and everything else in between. They actually have better manufacturing process and facilities. For us to build it from ground up is ridiculous. I think we that should be a path to attract foreign direct investments. That's what we're working on right now too.
So I kind of fall in the middle between the two of you.
We're going to build for you. Go ahead, John. Sorry.
So part of where my thought goes with that, back to your question, Tate, and thinking about China and Mexico and the relationship and how that impacts the US. So trade leads to investment, right? Because eventually a company will decide, and if the opportunities are right, that they don't want to deal with the duties anymore. They don't want to deal with the logistics anymore, and they just invest. right? Prime example, look at BMW US, right? Once
Mm.
when there was enough market here, they started expanding their production here. So trade leads to investment. And to me, there's been such a long history of back and forth trade on the border between US and Mexico. That's something that happens daily, products will go back and forth across for manufacturing and assembly, right? Back and forth across the border, the same product, So to me, my thought is it's actually great for all three, right? The increase in trade means the increase in investment down the road. But make no mistake, right? The trade relationship between Mexico and the United States is massive. And Arizona in particular, I was just reading about this earlier, is the 13th largest trading partner or something like that with Mexico and Canada. So there's a significant amount of trade and investment that will flow back and forth. So I do think, however, that we are entering an era right now where there will be a significant political push on pushing for investment over trade. And these tariffs are going to, I do think, push companies more towards investment in manufacturing at the location. It's not going to happen overnight. Companies don't. If you look at a greenfield investment, that could take anywhere from 2 to 3 years. A company can't just overnight invest and open up manufacturing. I mean, there's lead generation for their customers. You have to think through things like supply chains. There are very complex decisions that have to be made to expand investments and expand manufacturing. But I think the increased trade between China and Mexico is a good sign. That furthers the relationship, the complexity that I believe leads to more investment.
Barry, please.
Professor, I'm Barry Wong, the board chairman of Global Ties Arizona, a nonprofit that works with the U.S. State Department of International Visitors Coming to America. More specifically, on this issue, I most recently worked for now former governor of Arizona, Doug Guthrie. So he had established very strong pro-business policies in the state. And one of our success stories is Lucid, the electric cars, citing their factory in Casa Grande, Arizona. It's a central part of Phoenix, between Phoenix and Tucson. And part of the selling point of citing that factory here is our strong relationship, the political relationship, economic, with Mexico, specifically Sonora, Mexico, which borders Arizona. So we were able to work with our sister state to help Lucid set up a factory in Sonora, or work with suppliers there on parts manufacturing, supply some parts to the factory in Arizona. So the question is, and Doug, Professor, you had suggested that China companies set up factories here using that model of the Sonora parts feeding into as a supply chain. How would that work? But now talking about the proposed tariffs against China and circumventing tariffs going through Mexico, could our panelists talk about that? Would that model be less successful with the new administration come in with Trump on this tariffs? Please talk about that.
So, Barry, thank you so much for the question. And guys, again, I know, Tony, we're going to lose you soon, but I want to get both you and John. But to just summarize the question, what are the tariffs going to do to all of these things? Because I actually think that, again, my belief is the importance of global ties, global engagement, us all sort of being, economically intertwined. But are the tariffs going to screw this up? Tony, you look like you're on the road. Do we got you?
Yeah. I think one of the reasons, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe one of the reasons that they want to start taxing parts coming in from Mexico is a lot of Chinese manufacturers already set up bases in Mexico and try to circumvent that. So if that is one of the reasons, plus other things, and the tariff's not going to go away. And if Make in America is the ultimate objective, granted it will take a long time, unless there's new channel that is developed that can circumvent that. It's going to be hard. And I think eventually things will get so expensive, like Doug said. I mean, it's ridiculous how expensive it's going to be if we are really trying to do it over here. And that might, turn back the clock a little bit. And that also depends on how sensitive is the administration is, what the people really needed. And so that's why I think, Make in America is really, from Biden to Trump, I think that objective is the same because they needed jobs. And so it's no longer that you don't make in China. And China, a lot of Chinese are taking this as what happened to solar, which is anti-dumping, that you don't make in America, so it's making in other places. But I think that door probably will close very quickly if the American can think they can do it on their own.
So, John, let me go over to you. I have some thoughts on this, on Barry's question too, but John, you first.
Yeah, I think the tariffs are going to complicate a lot of things. And other things that we just don't even think about are our exports, right? And keep in mind, 80,000 people in Arizona are employed because of exports, right? And so when we start putting these tariffs on, it's not just going to be one direction, right? We just saw this with a rebound restriction on exporting minerals to the rare minerals to the United States after the Biden administration put some export restrictions on our side. That same thing is going to happen with tariffs, right? When we start increasing tariffs, if we shoot at China, there will be some nimble companies that will be able to expand to other places, potentially leverage the U.S.-Mexico relationship. But there will be other companies that don't do that and aren't able to. And our companies, keep in mind, will have the same problem. So my concern is when we have those, I think Tony is exactly right. It takes years. Some companies won't ever be able to do it. Some will have too much of the assembly or the manufacturing will rely too heavily on a workforce. And we have virtual unemployment here. Who are they going to hire, right, when they come here? So it takes years for that to play out, is my thought. But if we just have straight tariffs on China and the Mexico border is open, then Barry, I feel like that model is a model that back and forth across the Mexico border ends up being a potentially very strong one. But it depends on how we play out with Mexico as well.
So let me just weigh in. Do my and again, I want this to be about our experts here, and thank you, Barry, for your question. But my view here is a couple of layers. And John, let me just start with the thing that John just threw out. And John sent me an article about this. I guess there was just an article running the New York Times maybe today about China raising its muscles about rare earth production. I mean, guys, like most people in America don't realize this, but China controls the refinement of about 93% of the rare earth production in the world. And like when I joined Apple, I didn't know what that meant. Like I was like, whatever. But there was a story that is very well known inside of Apple. 2013, 14, or whenever it was, China had a dust up with Japan in the East China Sea. Suddenly, this little company called Sony was able to get access to neodymium. I was like, I know neodymium is. Like, what's neodymium? Oh, that's the thing that makes the magnets for earphones. And so, and China controls 100% of the refinement of neodymium. Like, so like, I think we get, I've got thoughts sometimes because I talk too much about the conversations I've had with suppliers. But the industrial clusters that have been built in Apple, for Apple in China, are amazing. But also China has very much leverage here in terms of its control of things like rare earths, right? And so John, you raised that point, but the other thing that is key to your question, Gary, you know, it's an interesting phenomenon. So the two largest economies in the world, China and the United States, have been the largest trading partners for a while, about a decade. And suddenly, in the last couple of years, last 2 years, we're no longer the largest trading partners, and our largest trading partner is Mexico. Now, if you think that China isn't sending a lot of their products to Mexico to then be sent to out the 300 billion, 25% tariffs, you're missing what's going on, right? I mean, so we all know this, right? Like we know, but I think to your question, Barry, like that raises issues of creativity. Like, how do we think about this, right? And so I think in a business school, like I want us to all be thinking creatively and advising Kate Gallego or Neil Giuliano or the mayor, the governor, like how do we build this manufacturing supply chain in Arizona that has relations, getting Chinese investment here, but doing it gradually, right? And doing it slowly and really thinking about the complexities of geopolitical alliances like, you know, not just US-China relations, but US-China-Mexico relations, US-China-Mexico relations, right? And so I think it's just an interesting creative moment for all of us to think this through and build the state of Arizona and build the city of Phoenix. Yes.
Well, just more, not like a statement, but like a question for everybody. Because also what's going on with the situation in Taiwan and Phoenix doing business with Taiwan, which I think is great, but I don't know how the government of China take that movement and if they will be willing to place some sort of manufacturing facilities where Taiwan.
So I know we have people in this room who are more experts than I am. I'll just say very clearly what my view is, but I want to turn to the experts in the room, okay? You're right. This is an important moment, an important time. And the reason I've sort of glibly said Phoenix is ground zero, it's not just because Phoenix is a fast growing city, it's because also TSMC is here and that matters. And TSMC has not just invested 65 billion in the Phoenix economy, they've also gotten 6 billion from the CHIPS Act from Joe Biden, right? Like there's a serious play. Now, the thing that I just want to say, and again, this is just me speaking. I had an interesting learning or interesting education this last semester. And Tate, you and Anamoy were there. So I teach 2 classes, leadership, and I also teach the sort of regional political economy class, Asia, and mostly, you know, a lot of shit for this sometimes because I just teach about China. But, and it's supposed to be about Asia, but Anamoy has helped me integrate India more into the conversation. But I had an interesting lesson because I always present as a one China policy guy. Like that's US law, right? Like we signed that negotiation. Now, Taiwan is complicated because when Jimmy Carter signed the one China policy with Deng Xiaoping, Congress, the House and the Senate passed the veto-proof Taiwan Relations Act, right? And so it's been a complicated dynamic. But my position has always been, but U.S. policy is one China policy, right? There were a lot of students in my classes, and I noticed, remember Tate, like they stopped coming to class, and they were the Taiwanese students that didn't feel seen. And it was a big lesson for me as a professor because I was like, I need to make this better. Like I need to help people understand the complexity of this island and this, you know, what they've gone through with colonialism, what they went through with the Sino-Japanese War. And so it's complex, right? And it's been, you know, there was a concept called the newly industrialized countries. They came out in the 1980s. It was in 90s. It was field research, and then they changed the name to newly industrial economies because calling Taiwan a country was not politically correct. But you know, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong. You know, if you want to include Japan in that, like, it's complicated. It's a complicated region. And it's the most important region in terms of shipping, in terms of, you know, and so the fact that TSMC here is amazing. 65 billion invested in this state. But it's a hot topic, I can tell you. I mean, there was a moment when, you know, I've been on the phone with people from Beijing, and they were like, what's your view on this? And so I think it's a great topic. I don't have a clear answer. My view is there is a policy in the United States that's the One China policy, but also the Taiwan Relations Act. But it's complicated. And, you know, like my only other point that I always emphasize to people is we are married to China economically. Like we if something bad happened and Apple, Tesla, and Walmart are kicked out of China, it would be devastating for the US economy. I mean, and I don't, the economy would probably be fine in terms of GDP, but stock markets where a lot of people have their 401ks, it would be bad. And so I just think we need to work together. And so it's a really hot topic. Thank you for touching the hot stone. No, I don't have good answers except to say, like, it's important that we all think about, and in my opinion, the important thing is we think about engagement. Please, John.
Very with a great point, and Lucent model is really great model, and continue to see, and the very one of the former state and all the ability to set up a model. But I think you have a chance to learn from that past experience. And one model comes from Taiwanese minor. The best supplier for chip making basically is not from China, it's Japan, Korea, South Korea, and Taiwan, and other countries. And for this country, the proposed future tariff should be lower than the target for China. So I think the model still can be copied to set up with the kind of Taiwanese supplier or Japanese Asian supplier in Mexico, and enjoy the use of local cheap labor and produce some parts and materials and this area. So far, I heard from a couple of Taiwanese suppliers that first land in Casa Grande, and the plant built like 50 million, 60 million facility there, and the combined distance to farm, the more than 12 hours distance from Phoenix, and the skill cannot get a cheaper labor, things like that. And if we talk to this kind of Taiwanese buyer, if they want the way to move further to the south border, you can have some give them the labor force there. And basically, in that way, we can copy learn from the recent experience.
Well, and John, you know, again, I'm just speaking for myself here, but I love that creativity. Like, that's what I would love for us as a group, is to walk away from the last 6 months of work we've done together and work with Neil, Giuliano, or whoever, and write a strategic plan. But it should be an open strategic plan. It should be creative. And, you know, maybe it is not just about US-China relations. Maybe it's about US-China-Mexico relations or something. But I love that. So thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Oh, yeah, please.
Going back to Mr. Barry's point about what are the possible de-escalation solutions. I think the possibility of de-escalation is the highest over here right now. If you think about it, energy security has been the forefront of the US foreign policy at the moment. It's going to become, if not ever. the presence of Musk, the push that he's trying to do and trying to, be like, okay, I need to make sure that there are certain things done that are not self-sabotaging. He's a character, no doubt, but I think he also recognizes the power of China. And one of the things that he did mention was the conflict resolution that's based on business solutions that can come in. Those are the most ideal ones. And I know that's one of the more, tension topics, but I think that'll be the only way forward. If you want something to work, you kind of have to give on both sides, right? And everyone knows, especially the Chinese governments, everybody knows that Walmart, Tesla, all of them, they're all highly dependent. But people also know that a lot of bonds, American bonds, are being held by Chinese government. This huge amount of money that's been purchased.
Yeah.
So it's not gonna be, a one-way, here you go, I'm giving you a blank check. It's gonna be something that both of them can actually work on. And that might be, and I would like to see more of a possible conflict resolution-based solution going forward rather than tensions are high. I genuinely think that in the next maybe one or 2 years, we might have a possible way to break down or de-escalate the situation.
So I want to, we still have John McKiel here, and I want to come over to you, John, but just very quickly, and I have some other thoughts on this, but like, yeah, that's what I want us to do. Like, I want us to not just be lecturing at each other and sharing information, but like, I agree with you. Like, we may have like the moment to really create the strategic planning that's why I keep saying Phoenix is ground zero for this, because I actually think we can do something here. And so I love your comment. Love it. And so, but John, any thoughts for you? You're the guy who has been with the US government in this space. Any thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm picking up some of the conversation, so I haven't heard it all. But one of the things, Doug, to that point right now of Phoenix being ground zero, Phoenix is the fastest expanding manufacturing real estate in the country. And the manufacturing prowess that Phoenix is approaching is something that I think is very strategically timed for the conversations that we're having right now. Because make no mistake that, I mean, while we are economically intertwined via trade, and I think I heard someone speak briefly about U.S. bonds, and there is a strong tie between China and the United States with a lot of economics. Investment is something that will pick up steam, if we, and it's interesting to come full circle back in these conversations. You may remember when we were talking in one of the first panels here, we talked about the significance of TSMC and what that was going to mean, not only just with further investments coming from the supply chain, but also cultural investments. And the interesting thing coming off of that, we had talked about that and how that was probably going to see some expansion, and the room kind of interchanged about it. 2 weeks later, didn't Haiphong announce their expansion into Phoenix? So the more that we see this, the more that we see these investments begin to pick up speed, it compiles, it grows upon itself with lots of different potential expansions in different sectors and different economic sectors, if you will. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here, particularly in manufacturing, as Phoenix is such a large growing real estate sector for manufacturing.
Thank you, John. And I have one closing comment, but anybody have any questions for John? We've lost Tony, but any other comments or thoughts? So, oh yeah, please, Lisa, go ahead.
So John, I was just thinking, because you did a strategic plan, you said for DC, you guys 12 years ago. Now, in terms of the location for Phoenix, right? So it's becoming a semiconductor and a biotech hub. But those two, do you think they're kind of related to the national security, can be restricted by the US government? So those areas may have, you know, kind of more hurdles than other field. What do you think?
So depending, and I don't claim to be an expert in this arena, particularly on the national security on these sectors. But what I would say is that you have also components and there are ancillary investments. But I would think that even beyond just biotech and semiconductors, there's a lot of opportunity for Chinese manufacturing in many different sectors. And looking at the real estate availability and the growing educational workforce that's ASU, as Doug has talked about this many times, and talking about really growing workforce training for manufacturing and the trades. I think there's a lot of opportunity in Arizona for manufacturing expansion. But great question. I'm sorry I don't have quite the expertise, I think, to answer to your content.
Let me jump on 2 points that just follow up on Lisa's question and John's answer to your question, and then I know we're getting close to time, so we got to close out. But the first thing is, I think if we're going to build the Phoenix economy and build the Arizona economy, we are much better off doing it in high tech and biotech than in light industry goods, right? Like light industry goods, I mean, you've all seen this, right? Like we've all been in factories in China in the 1980s when, you know, you have a space like this and you buy 100 sewing machines and you can move that anywhere, right? But high tech is different, right? High tech and biotech, these are different spaces. And that's why it becomes so embedded in places like China right now. It's because China has built those industrial labor forces that, one, depend on cheap labor, so the migrant labor force, but two, depend on vocational technical education, the people that can manage supply lines, right? And this is one of the things that's so interesting. I don't know if you all know this. Some of you maybe heard me talk about it before. It's one of the things that makes Michael Crow such an interesting university president, right? Because he didn't just come in and say, like, how are we going to increase lower selectivity so we can rise in the U.S. News and World Report rankings? He and his chief innovation officer lobbied U.S. News and World Report so that there would be a new ranking for universities that was about innovation, right? And what's the university that's been #1 in innovation for the last 10 years? World Report, ASU, right? And so, like, they've thought a lot about this, right? Rick Shangra, I think, is a brilliant guy. Michael Crow is a brilliant president. But one of the things that Michael Crow also did, in addition to just like lobbying for that, is he created this openness to university education and allowed for ASU to create a vocational technical labor force, right? And so, like, it is a space where we can be dominant, right? But I just think it's light industry goods is not a good space. High industry, like high tech, you know, the chip industry and the biotech industry, they are great spaces because there's embeddedness in those spaces. Once you're embedded in the vocational technical labor force that exists there, you can't leave, right? Because they're how to run those lines. That's why I always argue Apple's married to China, right? Because those people, you know, it's just, yes, Foxconn can set up a final assembly plant in Chennai, but whatever, like that's not what it takes to actually create really, you know, high tech manufacturing production of touchscreen glass, right? And so I just think it's a really interesting time. And so, John, I love that you raised the issue, and Lisa, thank you for the question, because I just think this is what we can do, guys. And I guess what I want to leave you all with, and I'm so thankful you all are here, and I know we're getting close to time, but I'm just, Mitchell, good to see you. Thanks for coming back. But I think that this is a remarkable moment. And, you know, I love our interactive exchanges about this, but I would love for us to be strategic planners, right? And whether that means working with, you know, Greater Phoenix Leadership, or, you know, maybe it's Global Ties, Chamber of Commerce, Greater Phoenix Leadership. I don't know what the model is, but like, we should be writing the strategic plan. And we have a lot of students here who care about these issues, right? And so I just think, you know, we've had you know, 5 great events together over the course of the last several months. And I'm so thankful for you all being a part of this intellectual dialogue, but I would love for it not to just be an intellectual dialogue, but like, let's do something big. Let's do something really exciting. And so I guess my main issue is I just want to leave you all with, first of all, thankfulness. And thank you for just being a part of these sessions over the course of the last 8 months. And thank you to the Foreign Policy Initiative for, you know, dealing with one of your faculty members who's obsessed with China. And I know we're going to do other stuff together, but I also just think this is a big moment. I do think this is not just blowing smoke. I do think Phoenix is ground zero for the stability of U.S.-China relations, but also bringing a huge amount of investment. And so I want us to figure out as a group how we do that. And so any final comments on the line?
You know, Doug, I think, well, thank you all for having me join here, but the one industry that I think I'd love to add on to that is renewable energy. It's a really growing area. It's something that we're going to see more and more of in the future. And it's also something that Phoenix has outlined as something in their strategy as a prime sector to focus on. But that being said, thank you all for having me. It is really great to be here again, and I look forward to seeing you all in person at some point again soon. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Any final comments, questions, concerns, thoughts? Thank you all. Appreciate you all. And if we could keep you all for one more minute to get a picture, that'd be awesome. And I always think it's a huge success when I don't even get through any of my slides.
This is